Hiya folks, it's Jocelyn. Welcome back to Yogi with a Book. Today we are finalizing my favorite authors of 2018 videos, and for this one we are going to be talking about authors that I only read one book from, but I loved that book so much that it made me want to read other things from them, and I just haven't gotten around to that yet. These are all authors that I feel like once I get a real taste of how they write, I'm going to consider them some of my favorites. Starting off at the beginning of the year, the very first author I want to talk about is Victor LaValle, because I read The Changeling by him this year, and oh my god. This is urban fantasy and horror and mythology and also satire. He just balanced so many elements so amazingly, and I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. I think Victor LaValle does really weird, really fantastical things that are rooted in reality super well, and I feel like that's going to be something that he continues to do in other books from what I've heard of those premises. So after reading The Changeling and hearing about some of his other things, I was like, yes, I will take more of that. Thank you. I think the next author I had a similar experience with was Nalo Hopkinson, and that's because I read Midnight Robber, which is a Caribbean-inspired both sci-fi and fantasy at the same time. Nalo Hopkinson, I believe, is Jamaican-Canadian, though I could be wrong. But I think a lot of the things that she writes are really taking from her Caribbean roots. And not only did I think that this very, very dark book was one of the most well-executed and original stories I read this year, but one of my friends, Jerry, over at Onyx Pages happens to consider Nalo Hopkinson her favorite author, and I love Jerry's taste. I think she reads some really amazing books, so I feel like Nalo Hopkinson's also going to make that way onto my list, and I already have 2 others of her books that I purchased afterward because I want to read all of them. The next author I read this year that completely took me by surprise was Tahereh Mafi when I read Furthermore. Tahereh Mafi is most well known for her YA trilogy Shatter Me, which apparently is now going to be more than one trilogy, but regardless, I don't have any experience reading that. I just read her middle grade, which was so fantastic and so whimsical and so beautifully written that it made me think that I might even love her YA series that seems to get some mixed results. She also recently came out with a contemporary, which is about a Muslim girl who's also a breakdancer, because Tahereh Mafi also used to breakdance, and if she isn't the coolest sounding author on this list, then I don't know who is. I also only recently discovered Rios de la Luz because for the Latinx-a-thon that I co-hosted with 3 amazing, wonderful booktubers here who are some of my closest friends, Andrea from Book Ramble, Priscilla from Bookie Charm, and Yvette from Book Cave, we decided to pick this book as our group book. This is indie published, which is part of the reason that I hadn't heard of Rios de la Luz before, but this is also one of those books that I have a very hard time describing. It was sort of sold to me as a book about water witches who deal with trauma, who are living on the US-Mexico border, and while all of those things are true, I don't think they really grab the essence of this story. Rios de la Luz is a queer Chicana woman, and so I think she mostly writes queer Chicana stories that sort of center people that we don't always hear from. She also wrote this specifically in a very poetic sort of language, very abstract, not really easy to pin down what was real and what isn't, and I think some of the best Latin American authors do that and use magical realism in such a way that is way more emotional than it is logical. And so I'm hoping that's something that will continue with Rios de la Luz's writing, but all I know is that I'm very excited to pick up more from her and just continue to follow her and see what other goodies she has in store. Latinx-a-thon was just a huge thing for all of us, and we had such a good time, and thankfully we all also really loved this book, so I know I'm not alone in saying that Rios de la Luz is officially on my radar. Keeping on with a mostly brutal fantasy theme, I also have Kat Howard, who wrote An Unkindness of Magicians, which is another book that was set in New York City and follows magicians in their tournament to figure out who is going to be the head of the unseen world. This book really pulls no punches, and Kat Howard gets really graphic with the murder very early on, but she does it in such a way that just made me want to devour this book so fast. I read this for the last round of Witchathon with my friend Emily from Em Likes Books, and both of us agreed that this is one of the better books we'd read this year if there weren't just some tiny fixes we would make to some of the pacing later on in the story. Regardless, I immediately added her other things to my want to read list because I think that she's one of those authors that just really speaks to me, and every premise for every book she's written just made me think, yes, 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 give me now, yes. The final author on this list is going to be Daniel H. Wilson, who wrote The Clockwork Dynasty, which was a book about robots, mostly, that started out in historical Russia, ended in mostly contemporary United States, but there was some traveling in there too. And just the really fun way he was able to keep me engaged, the way he made robots interesting to me, which I don't care about robots. I just don't. Made me think that Daniel Wilson had something special about him, and if you had told me earlier this year that I was going to go out of my way to try and read a book called Robopocalypse, I probably would have laughed in your face, but next year I am absolutely going to go out of my way to read Robopocalypse. He's a robotics guy in general, so I think robots are kind of his main deal, but he's also Native American, and so I think he brings a really interesting and underappreciated lens to robotics and to his stories, and I hope I can discover even more about him and these weird robots he's dreaming up in the future. Alright, so that's it. This is the end of my favorite authors of 2018 series. I'm obviously going to continue reading books because we're still in the middle of December, but this month is mostly going to be rereading for me, so I figured it was safe enough to just go ahead and compile this list now and call it a year. I hope you've also had a lot of success with 2018 authors this year, and I would love to hear some of your favorites down below. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this, to also like and subscribe if you want to see more of me. This is my first winter on BookTube, but I am really excited to be wrapping up all of the things and doing all of the stats and everything. So if you enjoyed this, the good news is there's probably going to be like 8 more videos like this coming your way. I'll also leave the first 2 videos in this series somewhere in the cards and also linked down below if this is the first one you're watching and you wanted to catch up. But otherwise, I will be back with another video shortly. Bye!